Story disclaimer. This story is a work of fiction and is intended for entertainment purposes only. The content includes dark themes, horror elements, and fictional depictions of rituals and sacrifices that are purely imaginative and not reflective of any real-life practices or beliefs. Viewer discretion is advised. This video is not suitable for younger audiences, and parental guidance is recommended. The story does not endorse or promote any harmful behavior, violence, or dangerous activities. Please note that all characters, events, and settings are entirely fictional and created for the purpose of storytelling. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or actual events, is purely coincidental. In a gripping tale of resilience, hope, and sacrifice, the village of Ebuka teeters on the edge of ruin. Haunted by an ancient, malevolent force, Okoro, the brave leader, makes an unimaginable choice to save his people. Yet, even with the darkness seemingly banished, the weight of survival breeds guilt and hidden shadows that begin to take hold. Join Amara and the villagers as they uncover deep secrets, confront their darkest fears, and undertake a perilous ritual that could either redeem or doom them. Can they find the light within before the final test of unity and courage? The small group of survivors huddled in the cave, their hearts heavy with the knowledge that they had only delayed the inevitable. The darkness was still spreading, and the creature they had encountered was a manifestation of a much deeper evil. Exhausted and filled with despair, they drifted into a fitful sleep, but their dreams were anything but restful. Okoro found himself in a strange place, a vast, empty landscape bathed in an eerie, greenish light. The ground was cracked and barren, and the air was thick with the stench of decay. In the distance, he could see the faint outline of the village, but it was distorted and twisted, like a reflection in a broken mirror. As he walked closer, the village became clearer, but what he saw filled him with horror. The villagers were all there, but they were not alive. They moved in slow, deliberate motions, their eyes blank and lifeless. Their bodies were decaying, rotting away as they walked aimlessly through the village square. In the center of the square stood the creature they had encountered in the grove. It was larger now, more monstrous, and its eyes glowed with an intense, malevolent energy. It watched the villagers with a cold, predatory gaze, as if waiting for something. Okoro tried to call out to the villagers, but no sound came from his mouth. He was trapped in the dream, powerless to stop the nightmare that was unfolding before him. The creature turned its gaze toward him, and he felt a wave of despair wash over him, so powerful that it nearly brought him to his knees. Then, without warning, the creature began to devour the villagers one by one, its shadowy form enveloping them like a dark cloud. The villagers' souls were consumed, their bodies crumbling to dust, and the creature grew even more powerful with each one it devoured. Okoro watched in helpless terror as the creature turned its gaze back to him. It began to move toward him, its massive form blotting out the sickly green light that bathed the village. He tried to run, but his legs felt like lead, and he couldn't move. As the creature loomed over him, Okoro felt the ground beneath him give way, and he was plunged into darkness. He fell for what seemed like an eternity, the creature's malevolent laughter echoing in his ears. Just as he was about to be consumed by the darkness, Okoro woke up with a start, his heart pounding in his chest. The cave was silent, the other survivors still asleep, but the terror of the dream lingered in his mind. He knew it wasn't just a nightmare, it was a warning. The creature was growing stronger, feeding on the despair and fear of the villagers. If they didn't find a way to stop it soon, the entire village would be consumed. Okoro awoke in the darkness of the cave, drenched in sweat, the remnants of the nightmare still clinging to his mind like a shroud. The others were stirring as well, their faces pale and drawn, haunted by dreams of their own. It was clear that none of them had escaped the grip of the creature's influence, even in sleep. "We can't stay here," Okoro whispered, his voice trembling. "The creature is feeding on our fear, growing stronger with every passing moment. We must find a way to stop it, or we will all be lost." The others nodded weakly, too terrified to argue. They knew Okoro was right, but what could they do? The creature was a force of unimaginable evil, and they were just a handful of frightened villagers, with no weapons or magic strong enough to combat it. Then, one of the villagers, a woman named Amara, spoke up. "There is a place," she said, her voice barely audible. "A place my grandmother once told me about. It's hidden deep within the forest, a sanctuary where the darkness cannot reach. The ancestors used it in times of great danger, to protect themselves from evil spirits." Okoro's eyes widened. "A sanctuary? Do you know where it is?" Amara nodded hesitantly. "I was only a child when she told me, but I remember the path. It's treacherous, and the forest has changed, but if we can find it, we might be able to regroup, to think of a plan." It was a slim hope, but it was the only one they had. With nothing left to lose, the group gathered what little strength they had and set out into the forest once more, following Amara's memories like a lifeline. The journey was harrowing. The forest seemed to twist and warp around them, as if trying to confuse and disorient them. The shadows were thicker here, alive with malevolent energy that clawed at their minds and bodies. But Amara pressed on, her grandmother's words guiding her through the maze of trees and darkness. Finally, after what felt like days of endless wandering, they arrived at a clearing. In the center of the clearing stood a massive stone structure, covered in ancient carvings and symbols. The air around it was calm, almost serene, a stark contrast to the chaos and darkness that surrounded the rest of the forest. "This is it," Amara said, her voice filled with a mix of relief and awe. "The sanctuary." As they approached the entrance, they could feel the oppressive weight of the creature's influence begin to lift, replaced by a sense of peace they hadn't felt in what seemed like an eternity. The sanctuary's magic was still strong, untouched by the corruption that had consumed the rest of the village. But as they stepped inside, they realized that this sanctuary, too, held secrets that might be their only hope of defeating the creature, or their final undoing. The interior of the sanctuary was cool and dimly lit, with walls of ancient stone etched with symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. The villagers felt a strange sense of calm as they stepped inside, as if the sanctuary itself was welcoming them, offering them shelter from the horrors outside. But even here, the darkness was not far away. As they explored the sanctuary, they found traces of the past, bones scattered on the ground, remnants of long-forgotten rituals, and the faint echoes of voices that whispered from the shadows. In the center of the sanctuary stood an altar, much like the one in the Grove of Lost Souls, but this one was intact, untouched by time or decay. Okoro approached it cautiously, feeling a strange pull toward it, as if something was calling out to him from within the stone. As he placed his hands on the altar, a chill ran through him, and the whispers grew louder, forming words that he could understand. "You have come seeking refuge," the voice said, low and filled with sorrow. "But there is no refuge here. Only the truth." Okoro looked around, but there was no one there. The voice seemed to come from the altar itself, resonating through the stone and into his very soul. "What truth?" Okoro asked, his voice trembling. "How do we defeat the creature? How do we save our village?" The voice sighed, a sound that seemed to carry the weight of centuries. "The creature you face is no ordinary spirit. It is born of your own fears, your own darkness. It is a reflection of the evil that lies within the hearts of men. To defeat it, you must face that darkness, and banish it from within yourselves." The villagers, who had gathered around the altar, listened in stunned silence. The idea that the creature was a manifestation of their own fears, their own sins, was terrifying. How could they possibly fight something that was a part of them? But how? Okoro pressed, desperation in his voice. "How do we banish it?" "There is a way," the voice replied, "but it comes at a great cost. The darkness that feeds the creature is powerful, and to banish it, you must make the ultimate sacrifice. One of you must willingly give up your life, your soul, to the creature. Only then can the others be saved." The villagers recoiled in horror at the thought. Sacrifice. After all they had been through, now they were being asked to give up one of their own. It was too much to bear. But deep down, they knew there was no other choice. The creature's power was growing with each passing moment, and if they didn't act soon, the entire village would be lost. The sanctuary fell into a tense silence as the villagers absorbed the spirit's words. The idea of sacrifice hung heavy in the air, a dark cloud that threatened to suffocate them. No one wanted to be the one to offer themselves to the creature, yet they knew that without a sacrifice, there was no hope for their village. Okoro looked around at the others, seeing the fear and despair in their eyes. These were the last of his people, the survivors of a once thriving village now on the brink of annihilation. He knew that he could not ask any of them to make such a sacrifice. It was too much to bear. "I will do it," Okoro said quietly, his voice firm despite the terror that gripped his heart. The others gasped, their eyes widening in shock and horror. "No, Okoro," Amara said, stepping forward. "You are our leader. We need you. There must be another way." But Okoro shook his head. "The spirit is right. The darkness is a reflection of our own fears, our own sins. I have led us to this point, and now I must take responsibility. If my sacrifice can save you all, then it is worth it." The others protested, but Okoro was resolute. He had made up his mind, and nothing they said could change it. They could see the determination in his eyes, the quiet acceptance of his fate. "Please, don't argue," Okoro said gently. "We have no time to waste. The creature grows stronger with each passing moment. I will go to the altar and offer myself. But I ask you all to promise me one thing: live. Survive this, and rebuild our village. Don't let my sacrifice be in vain." Tears filled the eyes of the villagers as they nodded, their hearts heavy with sorrow. They knew that Okoro's decision was final, and that he was their only hope. But that didn't make it any easier to accept. With a heavy heart, Okoro approached the altar once more. The spirit's voice echoed in his mind, guiding him as he prepared for the ritual. He knew what he had to do, and though fear gripped him, he pushed it aside, focusing on the task at hand. As Okoro began the ritual, the air in the sanctuary grew thick with energy. The symbols on the altar glowed brighter, and the whispers of the spirits grew louder, filling the space with an eerie, otherworldly sound. The other villagers watched in silence, their hearts breaking as they saw the light in Okoro's eyes begin to fade. He was giving everything he had, every ounce of his strength, his very soul, to banish the darkness. And then, with a final, shuddering breath, Okoro collapsed to the ground unconscious, but at the same time, the life force was drained from the lamb representing Okoro. The sanctuary fell into an oppressive silence, the only sound the quiet sobs of the villagers who had lost their leader, their friend. But as Okoro's unconscious body lay on the cold stone, something miraculous began to happen. The body of the lamb disintegrated as Okoro was regaining consciousness, helped by other elders who then would explain to him the deal they had struck during the transposition's ritual. The darkness that had consumed the village, the forest, and the very souls of the people began to recede. The air grew lighter, the shadows fading into nothingness. While Okoro did not actually die and was replaced by the lamb, the ancestor spirits wanted him to remain in the sanctuary and become the vessel between them and the mortal realm. The creature, the monstrous embodiment of their darkest fears, let out a final, agonized roar before disintegrating into a cloud of ash, carried away by the wind. The curse had been broken, the village saved, but at a terrible cost. They had all lost so much, and though they were free from the curse, they knew that they would carry the burden of survival for the rest of their lives. "We must honor his sacrifice," Amara said quietly. "We must rebuild, just as he asked us to. But we must also remember what we have lost and what it cost us to survive." The others nodded, their hearts heavy with sorrow. They knew that they could not let Okoro's sacrifice be in vain. They had to rebuild their village, to find a way to live with the darkness that still lingered within them. As they left the sanctuary, the air felt lighter, but the weight on their hearts remained. The darkness had been defeated, but the scars it had left would never fully heal. As the survivors left the sanctuary, the once menacing forest now seemed eerily calm. The oppressive darkness had lifted, and the village of Ebuka lay in a fragile peace. Yet, despite the visible calm, the villagers were burdened with an unseen weight, the guilt of survival. Okoro had sacrificed himself for them, but the echoes of his final act reverberated through their souls, leaving them questioning their worthiness to live on. Back in the village, the homes that had once been filled with laughter and life were now empty shells, haunted by memories of those who had been lost. The villagers tried to go about their daily routines, but nothing felt normal anymore. The guilt gnawed at them, a relentless whisper in their minds, telling them that they should have done more, that they should have fought harder, or perhaps even offered themselves instead of Okoro. Amara, in particular, was consumed by this guilt. She had been the one to lead them to the sanctuary, the one who had brought them to the place where Okoro had made his sacrifice. Every step she took in the village felt heavy, as if she were carrying the weight of Okoro's death on her shoulders. One night, unable to bear the guilt any longer, Amara ventured back to the sanctuary alone. She stood before the altar where Okoro had given his life, tears streaming down her face. She prayed for forgiveness, not just for herself but for all the villagers who had survived because of Okoro's sacrifice. As she prayed, a cold wind swept through the sanctuary, and the ground beneath her began to tremble. The faint glow from the altar intensified, casting long, twisted shadows across the stone walls. Amara felt a presence behind her and turned to see the faint outline of a figure, Okoro. But this was not the Okoro she remembered. His face was gaunt, his eyes hollow, and his once warm smile was replaced with a twisted expression of sorrow and anger. His voice, when he spoke, was a mere whisper, yet it cut through the silence like a knife. "Why did you let me die?" he asked, his voice filled with pain. "Why did you leave me to face the darkness alone?" Amara fell to her knees, sobbing. "I didn't want you to die, Okoro. I tried to stop you, but you wouldn't listen. We had no choice." Okoro's figure moved closer, his spectral form flickering like a dying flame. "There is always a choice, Amara. But now, I am bound to this place, to this sacrifice, because of that choice. But I am not dead, Amara," Okoro added. "I survived the ritual, as you know. I will remain in this sanctuary as the vessel for the spirit to help you and the future generation of elders guide our people. The darkness was never truly defeated, it lies within all of you." Amara gasped as she realized the truth of his words. The darkness had not been destroyed, or it had merely been driven deeper, into the very souls of those who had survived. And now, Okoro's spirit was trapped, a prisoner of the very darkness he had sought to banish. Amara returned to the village, her heart heavy with the knowledge of what she had seen. She knew she had to tell the others about Okoro's spirit, about the darkness that still lingered within them. But how could she burden them with this truth when they were already struggling to rebuild their lives? As she walked through the village, Amara noticed something unsettling. The villagers, though outwardly trying to return to normal, were beginning to change. Small, subtle things at first, a quick temper, a sudden burst of anger, or an unexplained sense of dread that would pass over them like a shadow. But as days turned into weeks, the changes became more pronounced. One villager, Kolechi, began to speak in strange, disjointed sentences, his eyes wide with fear as he raved about shadows that followed him, whispering dark secrets in his ear. Another, Chidi, began to sleepwalk, wandering the village at night with no memory of where he had been or what he had done. Amara realized with growing horror that the darkness Okoro had spoken of was manifesting itself in the villagers, taking root in their minds and hearts. The curse had not been lifted, it had merely changed form. Desperate to find a way to stop the darkness from consuming them all, Amara sought out the old texts that Okoro had once used for guidance. She spent long hours poring over the ancient scrolls, searching for anything that could help them. And then, she found it, a passage that spoke of the mark of darkness, a curse that bound itself to the souls of those who had been touched by true evil. The only way to remove the mark was through a cleansing ritual, one that required the purest of intentions and the strength to face one's inner demons. But the ritual was dangerous, and if performed incorrectly, it could amplify the darkness instead of banishing it. Amara knew that if they were to survive, they would have to perform the ritual together, united in their resolve to cleanse themselves of the curse. She gathered the remaining villagers and told them of her discovery. They listened in silence, their faces pale as they realized the true extent of their plight. The darkness that had haunted them had not been vanquished, it had merely changed its form, and now it threatened to consume them from within. But despite their fear, the villagers knew they had no choice. They had to perform the ritual, no matter the cost. They could not let the darkness win. Under Amara's guidance, the villagers prepared for the ritual that would either save them or seal their fate. The ritual required each of them to confront their deepest fears, their darkest memories, and the guilt that had taken root in their hearts. Only by facing these inner demons could they hope to banish the curse that had marked them. The night of the ritual arrived, and the villagers gathered in the village square, the place where so much had been lost. The air was thick with tension, and the shadows seemed to move of their own accord, as if the darkness was watching, waiting. Amara led the group in a circle around a fire, its flames casting flickering light across their faces. She began to chant the ancient words she had learned from the scrolls, calling upon the spirits of the ancestors for protection and guidance. The villagers joined in, their voices trembling with fear but growing stronger with each word. As the ritual progressed, the air around them seemed to grow heavier, pressing down on them like a weight. The villagers could feel the darkness stirring within them, trying to claw its way out. Some of them began to cry out, clutching their heads as visions of their past sins and fears flashed before their eyes. One by one, the villagers were pulled into their own private battles, each forced to confront the darkness that had taken root in their souls. Some saw the faces of loved ones they had lost, others relived their worst memories, the moments that had filled them with guilt and regret. Amara herself was not spared. She saw Okoro's face, twisted with pain and anger, accusing her of letting him die, of failing to protect the village. The guilt she had carried for so long threatened to overwhelm her, to pull her down into the darkness once and for all. But she fought back, refusing to let the darkness win. She remembered Okoro's final words, his plea for them to survive, to rebuild. She focused on that, using it as a shield against the darkness that sought to consume her. The ritual reached its climax, and the darkness around them seemed to erupt in a final, desperate attempt to hold on. The shadows swirled around the villagers, pulling at them, trying to drag them into the abyss. But then, with a final, shuddering breath, the darkness began to recede. The shadows faded, the air grew lighter, and the oppressive weight that had hung over the village for so long was lifted. The ritual had worked. The villagers, exhausted and shaken, looked at each other in disbelief. The darkness was gone, truly gone this time. They had faced their fears, their guilt, and their inner demons, and they had won. But the victory was bittersweet. They had lost so much, and the scars of what they had endured would remain with them forever. But they were free to rebuild, to heal, and to honor the sacrifices that had been made. With the darkness finally banished, the villagers of Ebuka could begin the long, painful process of rebuilding their lives. The village, once a place of sorrow and despair, now stood as a testament to their resilience and strength. Though many had been lost, those who remained were determined to honor their memory by rebuilding the village stronger than before. Amara took on the role of leader, guiding the villagers as they worked together to repair the damage that had been done. The homes that had been destroyed were rebuilt, the fields that had been left barren were replanted, and the once darkened river began to flow clear and pure once more. The villagers, though still haunted by the memories of what they had endured, found solace in the knowledge that they had overcome the darkness together. They had faced their fears, their guilt, and their inner demons, and they had emerged stronger for it. As the days turned into weeks, and the weeks into months, the village of Ebuka slowly began to heal. The scars of the past would never fully fade, but they no longer defined the village. Instead, the villagers chose to focus on the future, on the new life they were building together. One morning, as the sun rose over the village, casting a warm, golden light across the land, Amara stood on the hill overlooking Ebuka. She felt a sense of peace that she hadn't felt in a long time, a peace that came from knowing that they had survived, that they had overcome the darkness. And though Okoro was gone, his spirit lived on in the village he had fought so hard to protect. The villagers would never forget his sacrifice, nor the sacrifices of all those who had been lost. But they would honor them by living, by rebuilding, and by ensuring that the darkness never returned. As the sun continued to rise, bathing the village in light, Amara smiled. The dawn of rebirth had come, and with it, a new beginning for the village of Ebuka. Years passed, and the village of Ebuka flourished once more. The darkness that had once threatened to consume them had been banished, and the villagers had rebuilt their lives, stronger and more united than ever before. But the memory of Okoro's sacrifice, and the darkness they had faced, was never forgotten. Each year, on the anniversary of the day the darkness was banished, the villagers held a festival in honor of Okoro and all those who had been lost. They called it the Festival of Light, a celebration of their triumph over the darkness and a reminder of the strength that lay within them. During the festival, the villagers would light candles and place them along the riverbank, allowing them to float down the river as a symbol of the light that had guided them through the darkest of times. The children, who had been born after the darkness had been banished, would listen in awe as their elders told them the story of Okoro and the battle against the creature of the abyss. Amara, now older and wiser, would often be the one to tell the story. She would gather the children around her, her voice filled with pride and sorrow as she recounted the events that had nearly destroyed their village. But she would also speak of the hope that had carried them through, the hope that had allowed them to rebuild and thrive. The legacy of Okoro lived on in every aspect of the village. His name was spoken with reverence, his story a reminder of the strength that lay within each of them. The villagers had learned that even in the face of unimaginable darkness, they could find the light within themselves to overcome it. And so, the village of Ebuka thrived, a beacon of hope and resilience in a world that could be harsh and unforgiving. The darkness had been defeated, but the lessons it had taught them remained. They had learned that true strength came not from the absence of fear, but from the courage to face it head-on. As Amara watched the children play in the fields, their laughter filling the air, she knew that the village of Ebuka would continue to grow and prosper. The darkness was gone, and in its place was a light that would guide them for generations to come. As the years went by, the village of Ebuka became known far and wide as a place of peace and prosperity. Travelers who passed through would speak of the warmth and kindness of the villagers, and the stories of their triumph over the darkness spread across the land. But for the villagers, the most important thing was not the recognition or the fame, it was the knowledge that they had built a community based on love, strength, and unity. They had faced unimaginable horrors and emerged stronger for it, and that strength was now woven into the very fabric of their village. Amara, now an elder herself, continued to lead the village with wisdom and compassion. She had lived through the darkest of times and had seen the village rise from the ashes, and she was determined to ensure that they never faced such darkness again. Under her guidance, the villagers continued to honor the memory of those who had been lost, while also looking to the future with hope and optimism. They built schools for their children, planted gardens that flourished with life, and created a community where everyone was valued and cared for. The Festival of Light became an annual tradition, a time for the villagers to come together and celebrate their strength and unity. It was a time to remember the past, but also to look forward to the future, to the new dawn that was always just on the horizon. As Amara stood at the edge of the village, watching the sun rise over the hills, she felt a deep sense of peace. The darkness that had once threatened to consume them was gone, banished by their courage and resilience. And though the scars of the past would always remain, they were a reminder of what they had overcome and of the strength that lay within them. The new dawn had come, and with it, the future filled with hope and possibility. The village of Ebuka was not just a place, it was a testament to the power of the human spirit, to the light that could always be found, even in the darkest of times. And as the sun rose higher in the sky, bathing the village in its warm, golden light, Amara smiled, knowing that the future of Ebuka was bright, and that the legacy of Okoro and all those who had been lost would live on, in the hearts and minds of the villagers, for generations to come.